Welcome to a new segment we're doing. It's called The Golden Age of Leather. It's all about being a biker in the 80s, 90s, and hell, I even still ride today. Just going to kind of get right into it. You know, I was just a kid. I loved motorcycles and go-karts, and I basically bugged my parents so much about having one. And of course my mother thought that I'd die on one, and my father just really wasn't into anything like that, and he didn't think it was necessary. You weren't getting it. So eventually I ended up with go-karts and mini bikes and all that, but that's not really part of this story. But what is part of this story was a movie came out in 1969. It probably hit my town in about 70, maybe 71, and my parents said, oh, it's a motorcycle movie, and wanted to go to the drive-in theater. So we went and saw Easy Rider. I really don't think that they had any idea of the pot smoking, drug use, wild women, and the whole craziness of the movie. But, you know, to a 9-year-old kid, that was really something. It made a lasting impression on my mind, you might say. And then moving forward, you know, I was just a kid, kind of grew up to be a teenager, played guitar, got into rock and roll bands, got a few tattoos. I got in a little hot water, and somehow thought I might go to prison, and I didn't really want to end up in prison without a tattoo, you know. So, and good news, I didn't go to prison then. But anyway, I was into the rock and roll, and the tattoos and Harleys and motorcycles just seemed to kind of be a natural fit. So I got a bike. I started out riding. You know, I had a Triumph. That's what really got me into wrenching on bikes, because if you can't wrench a bike, you don't need a Triumph. And a guy I knew bought a brand new Suzuki GSR 850, and then he ended up going to prison for drugs. Where we lived was really oppressive for that kind of thing, and it was only a matter of time before the cops would get your number. So anyway, I bought that bike from him, and that's when I kind of really didn't like Jap bikes, you know. But finally, there was a place down in Colorado called Hog Wild. It's long gone now, but Ed Honeybine, who's passed away now, he sold me my first bike, and well, basically it was a Harley flathead on a BSA frame. I don't want to get too drug into the details of these bikes, but I ended up getting a pretty nice shovel head from the guy, and ended up riding and you know, drifting around, being a biker, hanging out, drinking, kind of learning the ropes of what it means, you know, going to the bar and getting in fights, and you know, and living the lifestyle. And I was only early 20s, really, kind of fresh out of school. Go to the local bar up there, a place called O.P. Taylor's, and ride in the door and do a burnout on the dance floor, or maybe spin a couple cookies and smoke out the bar, get 86. Next weekend you were back there. Oh, you better not bring that motorcycle in here. There's another little place there called the Eagle's Nest. It was a biker bar. You know, it was, I don't know, a real brief story on that. I took some Hells Angels there, that we ended up there on Sturgis, and we got in there and we were having a few beers, and some gal at the bar, it was like tile up by the bar, she fell off her bar stool, split her head wide open on the tile, was laying there bleeding. They finally drug her out the door, but nobody even mopped up the blood. People are walking around traipsing blood all over the place, and these guys are like, what the fuck kind of bar did you take us to? And these are some hardcore dudes out of California. Anyway, I kind of lost interest in that place when I saw a guy get shot in the neck there. You know, this is a little town. I'm not, if you know, that's great. I'm not going to name names. Anyway, back to the story. And I'm afraid that a lot of this storytelling is going to go like that, with little side stories. But that's why we're here. We're talking man to person, or whoever you are on the other end. I can't see you. Oh, wait. Oh, man, don't do that in front of the TV. Anyway, I ended up kind of hooking up with some guys and getting into a little motorcycle club called well, do I really want to say? Anyway, those guys were just partying fun guys, you know, and well, I'm going to go ahead and say they're called the Freedom Riders. They're still around today, and I don't know too much about them. I'm not in that world. They weren't a 1% motorcycle club, never were. But back in those days, there wasn't as many clubs around, and now there's a lot more protocols. And we'll get into that later because I have been affiliated with a lot of 1% clubs, but that's another story for another time. We're getting into what I'll call the murder of Lawrence DeGraff, otherwise known as Diggy. And the way it worked was I ended up getting into a little club, the Freedom Riders, and a bunch of guys that I knew kind of tagged along, and maybe some of them are watching today. A lot of them aren't here anymore, but we were, you know, having a lot of fun and drinking and partying, and we ended up getting some guys in there that were, this is what happens in a club when you kind of just let anybody in, and a guy named Bulldog, and he was a real asshole. And he was the kind of guy that would drink until he blacked out and then do stupid shit, and the next day people would tell him about it, you know. And he was a real strange guy. He used to have like Vietnam flashbacks, but he'd never been to Vietnam. So kind of a, you know, and if you're like a prospect or whatever, it's kind of your job to babysit him, which I wasn't, but thankfully. But anyway, during this time, the club, you know, we had some money in the treasury, things like that. So the Hells Angels had come to the town, and they closed a little bike shop down. I guess they owed them money, and they had taken all the parts that were in this shop, and they wanted to sell them and get the hell out of town. So the club I was in bought those parts, and then during that time, I had a couple of Harleys. I had a real nice 76 Shovelhead. And I had a Sportster, and a member of that club, and you might see this video, we'll just call him Mushy, that's what he went by. I'd loaned him one of my bikes, the Sportster, and then I hadn't seen him for like 6 months, and I'm like, hey man, you ever gonna bring my bike back? And he was hem-hawing around, and when he finally brought it back, the bottom of the transmission was hanging out. He had missed a shift or something. Yeah, I'm not going to blame it on him. The bike wasn't exactly perfect, but anyway, broke the cases, and I could badmouth Dragon Man down in Colorado Springs right now. We'll save him for another story, but he couldn't fix it correctly. Anyway, I ended up, the club had bought these parts, and there was a set of cases in there, and so they had all decided it was club money, and he was the president's little brother, and they all decided we'll just give, I went by Snake, we'll give Snake the cases. It was unanimous, except for these bad guys that were kind of they were festering, let's just say, and that was fine. I got him, fixed the bike. That's another deal. But during this time, there was a split in the club. These guys wanted to become hardcore, be 1%. A lot of the guys that were in the club had been 1% previously, and they just wanted to drink and party and ride. You know, have a barbecue, get some girls over. You know, it was a good time. And these guys wanted to be soldiers, and, you know, not everybody wanted to do that. So the club basically split. So, we're going to get into the details of all of this. I got to see how much time we got here. We'll go a couple more minutes. And a buddy of mine, Tramp, he's no longer with us. Me and him used to do a lot of car dealing, back and forth, parts, bikes, cars, hell, even a few girlfriends over the years, drugs, lots of drugs. That's another story we'll get into later. But I stopped by his place. He was living in this little house, and he was helping out an old veteran, and another buddy him lived there. We'll just call him Wheels. They all lived in this little house with a guy named Diggy, Lawrence DeGraff, ka-ching. And he had been in Lebanon, and he was poisoned by the Lebanese. They were cooks in the mess hall there, and they poisoned a bunch of these guys, and he almost died. But he never was quite right after that, and he was a little bit mental, shall we say. And they were helping him along, you know, and he was kind of footing the bill, but they were taking care of him, making sure he'd eat, you know, and he loved being around bikers, and he'd come, and I watched this guy scrape an engine block down with the little tiny screwdriver, just to keep him busy. But as long as he was there and in the mix with people, he was happy, and he was a good dude. Rest in peace, Diggy. Anyway, when the club happened, and then this is going to be the end of part one. I'm going to leave you all hanging. That way I know you'll come back to hear the rest of the story. Please, I'll take a moment right now. Like, subscribe, comment. Even if you hate my ass, put it down below, comment. Ring the little bell. It doesn't cost anything to you, and it really does nothing for me, but it makes it all worthwhile for me to sit and recount these tales. Anyway, I went over to my friend Tramp's and Wheel's place, and Diggy was there, and you know, we had some good times, and the club split in two, and a lot of the guys, me included, Tramp, Wheels, most of the old guys, they didn't want any part of Bulldog and these new guys, and so, including me, I was kind of on the fence initially, but this is what happened, and you know, God acts in people's lives in mysterious ways, and so those guys decided somehow that I should pay back the club the $300 for these parts. Well, I'm a broke guy. I had a baby, you know, and no money. I'm kind of trying to work on shit and deal drugs and do anything except get a real job, you know. But to be fair, it was the Ronald Reagan days. We were eating government cheese and ham, and there wasn't a lot going on in this little town I lived in, so times were tough, and I wasn't about to give back money so these guys could go party on it when they didn't have anything to do with getting it, anything. So we had kind of went back and forth about that, and one day they decided to show up at my house. I lived out kind of in the country a little bit, and they rolled into my driveway. And he had three of them there with him, and it was me, and my son was a baby who was in sleeping, and my dog. Anyway, we got into a little bit of battle of words, and I told them to get the fuck off my property, or I was going to put a fucking bullet through their head. And well, they didn't believe me, so I pulled out a 12-gauge shotgun, and I put a slug through the tailgate of their truck. Well, needless to say, they couldn't get the fuck out of my driveway fast enough. They were squealing rubber and hauling ass. And that was the last I saw of those guys. And the rest of the story involves what they did, and really has nothing to do with me, other than, as the cops would say, some people are guilty by association. So, that's my part of the story. Now we'll get to Tramp's part of the story. They had decided, since Tramp was a buddy of mine, may he rest in peace, that they were going to go over there and get his meal ticket away from him, because that's what they called Diggy. They didn't look at him they looked at him like a government check. And he was a disabled veteran, and he was easily led, because he had almost died and his brain was basically fried from what happened in Lebanon, and they convinced him, they were all ex-vets, and that he should come with them, because these guys were just using them, blah blah blah. And so he left, and a couple of months had gone by, and those guys, because they weren't about to come and tangle with me, and I hadn't seen Diggy, and Tramp and them had moved on, you know. They had to move out of their little house. They were doing whatever. But I went to go get my hair cut one day at a little barber shop, which was pretty rare for me. I had long hair back then. See, I don't have too much anymore, but I had hair almost to my ass back in those days. and a beard that I could put over my shoulders. Anyway, I went to go get my hair cut at a little barber shop there, and the gal that cut my hair was another club member's wife or ex-wife. I can't remember what was the deal with them, but she's cutting my hair and we're talking, and she mentioned that those guys were going around saying that they'd killed somebody. And that's where we're going to end the story for tonight, because we get right into the fat of the story the next time. So I hope that maybe some of this has sparked your interest. And, you know, I'm not mentioning a lot of names or locations too much just because, you know, that builds mystery. Anyway, it was nice seeing y'all. Hey, camera lady, you know how to shut this thing off? Because I don't know how. She's not really too much of a camera lady because it's on a tripod. But thanks for stopping by tonight. We'll catch you next week with some more of the story of Diggy.